going on, guys? It's your man Royalty. We're here today, and I'm back with another podcast episode. And my guest today is Brandon Draven, aka Pedro Nunez of the KLB podcast. I'm really happy to have you here, brother. Thank you for coming on.
I'm very happy to be here, man. Chop it up with you for a little bit. Talk a lot of interesting subjects.
Yeah, let's jump right into it then, man. So I want to first ask you, where you from? Where'd you grow up at?
I'm from LA, man. I'm from Los Angeles, California. Los Angeles, as Steve Austin likes to say. And so, I grew up in the East Side, Boyle Heights. So, anybody that knows about Boyle Heights, what up? And so, grew up in what I like to call the Wild Wild West era of LA during the 80s, early 90s, where, I mean, if you lived in the bad part of town in LA, and most of it was like East and South, you're going to have some stories, and there was all about survival at that time. And really, that's really what influenced me even up to this point, because it really defined who I was. And it really got me on that track of like trying to create change within my community. It started within my community, then it kind of opened up to like other demographics and other populations as well. But yeah, just seeing what I saw and growing up in a very impoverished neighborhood where
let's talk about the things that you saw, because I know Boyle Heights has a couple of gangs over there, especially the Suicidal gangs over there. So what was that like? Like being exposed to it, especially since I know that you're Latino too. So were they trying to court you on or anything like that?
Oh, for sure. And that's a way of life. I mean, you grow up into a generational life of gangs, right? I mean, it's just the way it was for a very, very long time. They didn't have any, like, now they have like community outreach programs, which I'm very happy to see, because it really keeps the youth out of trouble. Back in my time, it was all about just either you rolled with the gangs, or you were going to be in a lot of trouble. And what started to happen was that a lot of us were fortunate and lucky enough to kind of find other people that kind of kept us grounded, even though at that time we didn't see it that way. So I found a community of friends where we had a lot of gangster friends, as you could imagine. I mean, I've lost a lot of friends over the years to like lifetime in prison or getting killed. But my core friends were always guys that were more into like watching movies and going to like the mall and stuff like that. So they really kept me grounded at that time. But it was a lot of fighting during that time. It was a lot of just being surrounded by violence and drugs and just these families that were very destructive. And you saw the generational patterns that kept on going on and on and on. So that these are the kind of things that later on in my life, I kind of reflected on. And it's like, okay, what could I do to make a difference? Right. At that time, it within that community. Later on, again, it became bigger, but so that's where it started, and
that's the perspective a lot of people don't understand, is being the outsider, like, not being a part of the game. You would still experience it. You're not going to just turn down somebody's friendship because that's your friend. You literally saw them grow up, and then they chose the different path than what you chose.
But, right. No, you're 100%. And I think the big thing that people don't understand, people that have never lived in that environment, is the lack of choices. Because again, you're in the bubble. So when you're in the bubble and you're waking up every day to go to school, what's it going to be? Either get your ass whooped or have people have your back, right? And so these are the choices that we have as kids. It's like, okay, I need to have protection here. So I'm going to go ahead and ride with these guys. Well, that's where it starts. But then, the crime comes in, go boost that car for me, or go, rob that liquor store. And then once you're in the system, and it's very difficult to get out.
Especially that childhood mentality of, I want to fit in with these friends and they got my back, so why not? Like, people don't understand that dichotomy of you don't want to, you raised differently, and your parents telling you this, but your friends in the moment, what decision do you make? What's the right decision right then and there when somebody says go steal that car?
Yes, it's the peer pressure, but also keep in mind too that a lot of the families that I came up with, including my own, they're broken families. So it's not like you were gonna get that sense of family going home anyway. So what a lot of these gangs do, their biggest source of strength is that idea of having a family. And that's why parenting is very, very, very important, because I used to tell later on when I was in the workforce and I was working or whatnot, and I would see a lot of my coworkers put in like ridiculous hours of overtime. I would be like, don't you have kids? And they're like, yeah. Well, if you're not there being a parent, the streets are going to be their parents. That's all you need to know right now, especially when they're teenagers, which is a
Right.
very critical time in their lives when they're
I,
developing their identity. So that's a choice that you have as a parent. It's like, if I'm not going to be there emotionally, which is the key component, because a lot of these guys would always come back to me with, well, my kid never misses a hot meal and they have a roof over their head.
oh
And I
yeah,
go, yeah, but where is that emotional connection? Because
exactly.
that's what fucking Lalo and Herbert are gonna go give this dude out in the street corner, right?
Right.
They're gonna give him that sense of family, that emotional environment that every kid needs to feel safe. And once they get that on the streets, it's very difficult to bring them back.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think honestly, I had a talk with my dad about that. That's where he said that he messed up because he grew up in poverty, so he was determined that I wouldn't go through the same thing. But in that he worked so much that there was periods of time where I didn't see my dad for weeks or days or sometimes it was in passing to where the relationship wasn't built. So I started to gravitate more towards the people who were there, which was the game bangers and people who wanted me to do other things. And people were like, well, why are you doing that? You have both parents, but it's just like they're not here. I'm home
Right.
alone. It's just me and
Yeah.
my little sister. What adult do I have to role model myself after?
Yes, and even this entire conversation is the problems are very systemic. In other words, there's a lot of other issues that feed on the main issue, which is lack of role models and lack of leadership.
Right.
And so, not only are you dealing with a situation where you might have absent parents, which affects you and makes you feel neglected at home, you might also have a situation where the parents are overworked, because remember, we're living in a community of poverty. So you have parents that are working 12, 16-hour days
Oh yeah.
to make minimum wage, and the last thing they want to come home to is to a conversation with their teenage son or daughter. And so they just come home and they're already upset at life because they're tired, they're
Right.
miserable, they're probably not happy in their marriage. And so all these little things add up to the perfect storm of like a chaotic environment, which leads to a life of crime. And these are the things that if we could catch early, we could do something about it, interventions, and stop, and that's really what motivated me to get into the field of being a therapist, a psychologist, mental health, etc. That was the beginning right there. I was like, I have to do something about this, and that's what I did. And it's a big accomplishment on my end.
When did you know that you wanted to pursue uh, something in the mental health field? Like,
I
what was
I
the
think I
inspiration?
Okay, I always have this story. I always tell this story about how I remember when I was like 19, and I was walking up a hill and I saw an old man. I guess somebody had like tilted his wheelchair, and then very mean spirited shit to do, and then they just left running. And I saw the man on the sidewalk. He was like 80, and they had taken off with his wheelchair. To top it off. And I told him, man, where do you live? And he told me, I live like just like a couple houses up. And I picked up the man and I walked him all the way to his house. Like, I lifted him up. And
Mhm.
I remember that sense that I got. I remember how good I felt afterwards, right? Because at this point I was doing all kinds of drugs anyway. So I remember that high that I got from helping a fellow man felt so incredibly powerful to me, that that's something that I wanted more of. And so that was the impetus of me kind of switching my mindset and saying, this life that I'm doing now is not the correct way of going. I want more of what I just did, which is help someone. And that was the little seed right there. Of course, it took more years. I still did some dumb shit along the way, but that was the start of it. And that's a memory that I'll never forget. So it started right there. And then I also had a lot of experiences with like, one of the, I had female friends that were like, raped. And so I felt so helpless, and because I saw what it did to them. And so that was another thing that I witnessed in my early 20s, where I was like, what could I do to help these women? Because that's horrible, and it's horrible that they have to carry this wound for the rest of their
Right.
life, and it guides their behavior. Somebody who's a survivor of sexual assault is never the same again, and their behavior is guided through that trauma. And so I was like, I want to help these. So
I,
it was a bunch of little things like that.
I want to stop you right there because you brought up something that actually I didn't think I was going to talk about, but I'm in the foster care. I'm a foster parent. My wife and I are foster parents, and I have to say that all of the we've had girls here. All the girls that we've had here have been victims of sexual assault, and
Uh-huh.
me not being trained in how to handle it, like it was difficult at first. I knew one thing. I knew it wasn't their fault, and I knew to be there for them as far as if they needed to talk. I established boundaries for them as well. But is there any tips that you can give to people like me that are dealing with people who have dealt with sexual trauma?
Well, yeah, I mean, if somebody, it's this is a very simplistic conversation. Of course, people that are sexual abuse survivors, they need a few years in therapy to really kind of come to terms with their experience. But a lot of it is just embedded in that guilt and that shame, and a lot of it is validated by the people around them, right? How many times have we've heard, oh, you shouldn't have been at that party, or
Oh
maybe you
yeah,
shouldn't have dressed like that, and so what starts to happen is that the victim starts carrying the guilt of the entire experience rather than allowing the victimizer to carry their share of the guilt, which is important. And so what I like to do in my therapy sessions is I like to work in this idea that we need to allow the victim to start spreading the shame and the guilt to where it really belongs. And a lot of times it'll be at home too, because that's also common. I mean, a lot of sexual abuse survivors come from the household, unfortunately.
oh
and
yeah,
so and so we need to start saying what here. And I like to actually write down, I like to make a list with them, and it's like let's go through that day, or let's go through that event, and let's really break down what is and isn't your fault of that particular day. And what you see a lot of the times is that the list of the section where it says your fault, it's zero. There's nothing there. And the list where it says the perpetrator's fault, or the environment's fault, that's where you see the longer list. And it's
right,
important that sexual abuse survivors see that they have to visually, because when you see something, it stimulates the brain rather than just being caught up in your emotions, right? So a lot of the times what happens with people that have been raped, they live in their emotions, and their emotions are filtered through that event. So obviously you're never going to have a clear perspective of what happened that night, or during the course of whenever you were abused.
right,
So it's important to break it down and put context to the event, and through the time, the victim starts accepting themselves more as a victim, which in turn leads them to having that survivor mentality than just everything's my fault. Because
right.
when they think that everything's their fault, then what are they going to do? They're going to punish themselves for that event, and it starts leading to that chaotic life where it's very, they're full of self shame, guilt, anger, and it's going to lead them to self punishment for the rest of their lives, and that's
Right.
what we don't want.
Right, right. Yeah, that's been one of the struggles of having these girls, and it's been a great feeling to have them because part of the reason why I got into this was I understand how it feels not to have someone there for you. So I try to be a positive male role model for them and have show them what a real family is when they come into my household. That was my last podcast was about was the foster parenting and all the girls dealing with that same issue was crazy to me, but it's like I guess it's prevalent in these broken homes to have that environment where they can be sexually abused and
Yes.
parents not accepting it. One girl I can't share names, of course, but said that her mother did not believe her to the point
Horrible.
where she brought the victimizer over to have her accuse her in the victimizer's face. Like, do you know how terrifying that is?
Yes, yes, and the sad part about all these experiences is that it's not just about the event; it's about what happens after the event, and the environment that the event took place in. Because again, if it's the worst thing is when it's in a family setting, because what happens right away is that the family goes into denial, because to accept the truth would affect the entire family, and there's a dynamic there's something in mental health that we call family systems, and it's an entire different conversation where our identity is based on our caregivers. And
Right, right,
so especially at a young age like that. And so what starts to happen is that if the family goes into denial, there's still that tension of the event that happened. And so who ends up being the recipient of that tension is the person that was victimized, because they're the only ones that could carry it, because they're the only ones that lived it. So it becomes a very kind of like self-fulfilling prophecy of like just shame and guilt, and that's the thing that the person carries. And so a lot of the trauma is there's a lot of it that comes from the actual sexual assault, but a lot of it is also just continue to validate that shame from that sexual assault that the environment puts on the person. And that's really the tragedy of it all, because if there's the proper attention given relatively soon after the event, then the process of healing is not as intense as it is waiting years down the road. And that's something that I also work with a lot.
Right.
But again, just putting the specific blame of where it belongs, with kind of like with visual stimulation, and through just validating the person's emotions. Because let me tell you another thing, a lot of these females, they go years without nobody validating what they went through. It's been all judgments and zero validation. None of these girls ever hear, I'm sorry you went through that, and all the frustration that you feel, all the anger, all the shame, it's valid. That's what. And some of these girls need to hear that. And when I have sessions and they hear it for the first time, that's enough. Sometimes they start crying, and it's like a big, like a new insight they have. Like, oh my God, what I've been feeling this entire time does have value, and I'm so thankful for that now. So now I could move on. I mean, just start the healing process. Not like you're gonna be okay the next day,
Right.
but just start that healing
To get it
process.
started is a good thing, and I'm happy that it's a conversation now, because years ago, especially in the Black and Latino families, that it wasn't okay to talk about stuff like this.
No, and that's because we come from what we call a collectivist culture, which means the Black and Latino families, it's all about the family first and the individual second. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because there's been a lot of successful cultures that have that mentality, and they thrive.
It's a reason behind it too. Like, I understand, like, it's a reason behind it, but it's not okay to bury things in the family.
No, it's not. No, it's not. And in the end, there's that unresolved tension that could linger for years, and it hurts everyone. Even the people that are in denial, they have that anxiety. They don't even know where it's coming from, but it's coming from that denial of the truth, which is somebody hurt somebody else in this way, and nobody's talked about it. And so the more they normalize that kind of atmosphere, the more people tend to cope with it and be able to live with it. Except for the person that got victimized, they're stuck in this hell where they're constantly reliving that event over and over and over again. And actually their behavior is following that trauma, which is, to me, is the most dangerous part.
Right. That's why I'm happy that it's being able to be talked about now, and people are bringing it to popular media. Like, I don't know if you're aware of who Kendrick Lamar is, but his new album was covering that. And to see people actually talk about things like that were so taboo to talk about is such a great thing to me. Like, it just feels freeing now that people can talk about whatever you went through as a child, and not just say, oh, because the way we grew up, oh, our parents did the best they could. It's like, you can realize your parents did the best they could, but also realize, hey, they fucked up right here too. Like,
yeah, and it comes down to coming to terms. One of the things that I've used in the past is this idea of accepting that there's a lot of ignorance in the previous generation, and what it does is that it disconnects you from taking everything that you experience extremely personal. For example, like with me, I'll have some self-disclosure here. Like, I was also abused as a kid within my household. There was a lot of verbal and physical abuse. And for a lot of years, I was a pissed off guy. Like in my 20s, I was very kind of like self-sabotaging kind of guy. I would engage in activities that I knew would get me in trouble, but I didn't care, because I didn't love myself, because I never had that safety and security to do so. And then as the years went on and I started doing my own healing, I came to the conclusions that my parents were ignorant. It's like there was no malice intent in the way they raised me. Now, that's not to say that some parents aren't. There's legitimate evil out there in the world. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, as we're analyzing the trajectory of our childhood, I started thinking, well, my parents didn't know any better, and they're also just responding to their own trauma.
mm-hmm.
So they're just ignorant people. So you know what? I'm gonna forgive them so that I could forgive myself and move on with my life. Even though, and this is the hard part for a lot of us, even though they're never gonna have accountability for what they did. And that and a lot of people get stuck in that. And that also just leads to a life of being remorseful and just kind of being bitter. We have to get past that, or else we're kind of just carrying that trauma along with us the entire time.
And that's kind of what I'm going through now with the I told you off air, but about my mom passing away, and the grieving process for me is being able to accept the things about my mom that were good and the things about my mom that were bad, and saying that she was a flawed person, but she was still my mother.
That's right. That's right. And that's the thing about life, is that we're all flawed, every single one of us. And I think we tend to get stuck in this idea of perfection, and this idea that we like to put our experiences in these little blocks and say, oh well, most of them were good, so I should be okay. And then, or else most of them were bad, so I should not be okay. But that's not how life works. Life works, and there's a spectrum to it. And we're gonna have our good days, we're gonna have our bad days, our good experiences and our bad experiences. And it's just about learning how to react to those bad experiences that are gonna allow us to move forward, right? Because we have no control over that. We have no control over what my parents did to me, or what my neighbors or anybody else. All I could control is how I react to that. And that's really where my power as a individual comes in. The difference between being passive, a passive spectator, and an active spectator in your life, is acknowledging what you can and cannot control, and then moving forward that way. And you hit it right on the head. Your mother was flawed, but she was still your mother, and I'm assuming that she loved you very much and you loved her. and
Right.
and that's what you're going to hold on to, and that's great. That's beautiful.
And like, part of me was upset that we didn't get a chance to work through all of our issues while she was here. But then some people, I've also had people in my family like, oh, well, you can't say that about your mom. But I'm like, well, you if you can't allow me to tell the truth about her because it's my mother, then that is my way of grieving, is to tell the truth about what happened. I'm not downing her or anything. I'm saying this happened.
Yeah.
These these
And you
negative
know,
things happened. She did kick me out. She did do these things to me. Yes, but I
mhm.
still love her. She gave me a home when for 10 years of my life I was homeless.
Right, right.
So
And so, at the end of the day, that's you tributing your mother in an authentic way, right? Because to be inauthentic is to just kind of continue the narrative that your family probably wants you to continue because it benefits them.
right,
It's very easy to just be in denial and say, no, 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 that's not the right narrative we want to follow. This is the narrative. But in your mind, because you know the truth, because you lived it, you're saying, no, I want to honor her by representing how she truly was, which was a flawed but loving person,
exactly.
that like we all are. And that's really what's going to allow you, within your own time frame, which we talked about off air, which is important. That's really what's going to allow you to move
That's
on
what I wanted to
with your
dive
life.
into too. Is the conversation about grieving, because loss has been a huge thing for a lot of people over these past 2 years in life. Period. If you're gonna live, you're gonna lose somebody you care about. So
That's part of the human experience. And to piggyback on what we were talking about with people that have been sexually abused, um and trauma's trauma, right? I mean, one of the things that I find very disrespectful is that when we try to put a value on trauma, I have a lot
right,
of people that come to me that say, well, I feel depressed, but I really shouldn't, because all I had was like a couple people yell at me. And I stop them right there and I say, wait a minute, first of all, that's your experience, that is your worldview. You don't see the lens through everybody else. You see your life through the lens of your life, and that's it. So if that's enough for you to put you in this state, it's completely valid, and I completely understand where you're coming from. So let's not start comparing trauma, because that's
oh man,
disrespectful to yourself. you
I
know
have had that thought for so long, and I tell people, don't compare your struggle to somebody else. It's just like, well, I was poor, but I wasn't as poor as the people in the third world country. It's just like you
no, that's denial, is what that is.
exactly.
So essentially what you're doing is you're trying to put a band-aid on your pain, and those
Right,
band-aids never last. So you have to process your pain. You have to process what you went through and acknowledge that it hurt. Acknowledge that even if you compare yourself to like a third world country or any other thing in your life, in your worldview, which is what matters the most, that fucking hurt, and that needs to be processed and come to terms with. So
right.
that's very important. Yeah, no, there is no trauma comparing. But what I was gonna get to is that one of the things that helps people is, because you know how they say that misery loves company, and it's
Right,
like
right.
when we put the perspective of pain is part of the human experience. Loss is part of the human experience. Injustice is part of the human experience. In other words, we're all in this together, and there is no one person in this earth that's resistant to trauma or pain or injustice. I don't care how much money you have, what titles you have. Everybody goes through the same shared experience at one time or another. When we paint that picture to people, it's very soothing, because at that point you start to understand everybody's going through this. I'm not the only one that's going through this right now. And you start making it less personal and more of a communal thing where everybody could share the pain, right? Which helps. It's very therapeutic. That's why community groups and like group therapy is very beneficial, because you start meeting people that relate to your pain. And that's also been very successful when I work with women who've been raped, and I start painting that picture of like, unfortunately, there's monsters out there. There's a lot of monsters out there, and this is something that a lot of women go through, and so they start to understand that it's like, it's not just me. I'm not the only one that's in this pit right now. There's a lot of people like me, and so that kind of soothes, and it really helps with the healing process as well.
Yeah, that is a beautiful thing. So, what inspires you to go into the specific? You said you're a health, a marriage,
Uh,
family therapist. What made you get into that form of therapy instead of others?
Well, there's a bunch of them. You're right, and to me, I'm a big proponent of family dynamics. So to me, I was always like, okay, well, in order to create change in the individual, we had to look at their entire surroundings. We have to start there, because all of us are molded through our surroundings, our upbringing, our caregivers, our friends, our job, everything. So I need to see what's influencing your personality from that perspective, because that's going to be the majority of who you are as a human being. We have to get what we call our schemas. Our schemas are our map, our internal map of how we perceive the world and how the world perceives us. We only get that through experience, through being alive day to day. And so we get our schemas from our surroundings. So family plays a very critical role in how you behave as a person, and how you see yourself as a person, and more importantly, how you treat yourself as a person. So in understanding that, being a family marriage therapist allowed me to kind of delve into that more and work more with like relationships and the family unit. Even though I do work a lot of one-on-one, but still that was my main foundation to getting into this, and that's what I followed.
So, do you counsel the couples together and children as well?
I do children, your couples, families, and yeah, one-on-one. But yeah, my specialty is definitely like relationships.
Do you have your own practice? Or are you hoping to have your own practice?
No, no. Right now, I work at a hospital. It's like a psychiatric hospital here in LA.
Okay, yeah, my
Yeah.
dad, that was actually he worked at a mental hospital in Norwalk. He worked at a Metro. I don't know if you know where that is.
Okay, I know. Yeah, I know that place. Yeah, that's definitely we definitely refer people there from time to time. And then the one that I'm at, which I don't want to say, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you don't have to
Um,
say it, of course. Yeah, he
but
worked.
but I
He
I,
was
I
the psych
decided.
tech there.
Yeah, I decided to work there because that the acuity level is extremely high there, as you could imagine. That's like the last stop. That's like the highest level of care for somebody who's in high mental distress. And so I
Right,
wanted to get that experience. I wanted to work with people that are at a high acuity level, so that I could focus on my interventions. Like I always like to say, I want to build my toolkit, right? And so
right.
in order to do that, I wanted to go to the highest level of care possible, and an emergency hospital setting is going to be that. So I'm working with people that have already attempted suicide and survived. I'm working with people that are extremely anxious. I'm working with people that are severe addicts, whether it's substance abuse or gambling or sex or whatever the case may be. So I'm working with the highest level of care. And the way I see it, when I do open up my own private practice, I mean, I'm going to be dealing with like mid-level care or maybe low-level care, and it's not going to be as intense, and I'm going to be more confident. So that
Right.
was really the idea. And so it's been working out pretty good for me. I mean, I've been able to develop a lot of strategies and interventions for the people.
You have no
And
idea how much I respect that, because my journey is different, because I've been hospitalized for suicide attempts. Actually, I've been hospitalized over 100 times. It's something I haven't shared like that, but
mm-hmm,
and I've had some horrible experiences with inpatient care.
yeah.
where I've been to hospitals where they've had people who I understand now shouldn't have been on the floor with a psychiatric patient, especially dealing one-on-one with them, literal security guards working with one-on-one with patients who actually one told me, oh, you shouldn't even be in here, you're faking.
That's horrible. That's a horrible. So essentially, you went there just to feel worse about yourself,
Exactly. Like
and that's so unethical. It's so unethical to go to a place for help and just because, like you said, and you could relate to this. When we go to these places, we're very vulnerable. We're our wound is completely exposed, and to
right,
have somebody just kind of rub salt in it, it's very disrespectful and it's very dangerous as well. So I completely understand where you're coming from, and the the for-profit hospitals, as you could imagine, there's a lot of politics there that sometimes don't make it the most ideal place to go get psychiatric help, unfortunately.
right.
um
I think we're really usually just go to where we know, and it's the area that I was in at the time, and I didn't have any money. I was homeless, so I just went to the closest hospital, and that was it. And being in that environment made it worse. And then what just happened was I got picked up by an ambulance worker who, like, when I cut myself, he told me, "Oh, you didn't mean to kill yourself. You cut yourself the wrong way. If you want to kill yourself, cut up."
yeah,
And
well, all he did was tell you how to do it right. That's
right, I'm
horrible.
just like, and like back then, I'm like, I'm upset, but even now, I'm more upset because knowing that you could have literally pushed somebody over the edge right there, and they could not be here today. Like,
Yes, I'm sorry you had to go through that, man. That's a horrible experience. And
right,
I wouldn't wish it on anyone because, like you said, you're vulnerable, and all you're doing is you're validated. Here's the thing. Let's clarify what having extreme suicidal ideation means, because a lot of people have this idea that what it means is that you're sad. Sad is just one of the minor components of
exactly,
having high suicidal ideation. When you have a high SI rate, what it means is that the pain that you're going through is so intense that you would rather die than continue living with that pain. Okay, so it's not just about being sad, it's also about being hopeless and helpless. In other words, you don't see the exit of that void that you're in, you know.
right,
And when I work with people that are suicidal, I like to introduce like a ladder, like a, like a, just like a ladder system, to where we're gonna take it rung by rung every single day. I don't expect you to see the light tomorrow, because you won't, and I'm not gonna lie to you about it. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take a step up that rung, and then as we're working together, we're eventually gonna get to the point where you see some light, but not all the light, right?
right,
And a lot of that is about accepting yourself, because a lot of the SI comes from internal self-hate, and this idea that maybe you shouldn't be here because you don't deserve to be here. So working with that and understanding the fact that you're going to be in that darkness for a while, even after you're getting the help, is an important step in saving your life, you
right.
know, without judgment. Because a lot of the reasons why people end up trying to kill themselves is because that's how they've been getting the entire time. For example, let me reframe to you what this guy was telling you. What he was telling you is, you don't deserve to be in this ambulance right now because you don't deserve to be alive. That is the interpretation that somebody with
Exactly.
a high SI would get. And so they're just gonna go out and do it the right way next time. That's it. Simple as that.
Right.
And that's very dangerous, and it's very unethical. And it really upsets me when I see situations like that play out. Because like you said, it's very common, unfortunately.
Very, very much so. And for me, now that I know this, like, I can't imagine how many other people had to go through worse things. Like, I've had, well, to the point where I'm going through therapy now.
Hmm.
But it took me a while to even be comfortable with it, because when I was 17, I had experience with a therapist who overstepped her boundaries as far as, uh, I was in a group home, and she was the therapist for the group home. She was very inappropriate sexually, and she had me clocking her in and out for work. Like,
No, yeah, that's
it
already.
was so warped, bro. Like,
Yes.
I was just like, and during the time, the people there, the staff there, tried to make me feel like I was wrong. And like, I had the no snitching thing in my head back then, where I'm not gonna tell on her until
Yeah,
finally,
that was the street in you. I had the same thing for years.
right? Like, I'm not gonna tell on her for this until finally that she said that I stole her card. And I'm like, well, I'm gonna end up going to juvie for this shit.
Yeah, yeah.
So I told on her, I was like, well, no. She gave me the card. And they would have believed her because the manager of the place laughed in my face when I told them that she gave me her card to clock her in and out of work. She laughed in my face. And luckily they had installed camera the last 2 weeks I did it. And they had saw on the camera that I was doing it every day, like I said, at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Right. And so, yeah, this field, as you've probably seen throughout your life, this field, it tends to attract a lot of like narcissistic people.
Right.
And because you do have power whenever you're in a therapeutic setting. We call it clinical authority, and we could use it for good because our word has a lot of value to the patient or the client, and so that's a good thing. But also it's a bad thing because if you don't know how to control that power, and if you're a very narcissistic person, you're going to abuse the therapeutic relationship, and that's when people get into trouble, like you were saying. So it's important that we weed out, and we do have checks and balances. I mean, there's government boards that look out after us. We get audited for our charts, our bookkeeping, et cetera, et cetera. But still, some of these guys get through, some of these females get through, and they abuse their power, and they end up doing more damage than good. And that's the dark side of being in this field.
Yeah, I have a deep disdain for people that take advantage of people, especially when they're vulnerable like that. And
definitely
I
for sure.
To have people there that genuinely care, just like any field that you're dealing with people, you need to be able to. I mean, I understand people are human as well, but you have to be able to separate yourself from the job enough to care for the people despite whatever you're going through. And I think people that abuse the power are just despicable.
But that's all nonsense. You should be you should find them despicable, and I'm gonna tell you why. Because in our training, we go through hours and hours and hours of intense self-reflection work. We go through hours and hours of ethical guidelines. We have an ethics exam that we have to take like once every 3 years. So this whole idea of like these persons are just being guided by their instinct, that's bullshit. Because before you even get into the field, that's why we have to do so many hours of practicum. We have to do so many hours of internships, because before you even get into the field, it's embedded into us how important it is to always start with the client. You always start, you in other words, when you meet somebody for the first time and you're going to start therapy, you start where they're at. You don't start where you're at. That's really unfair. So you always try to connect with the client to where they're at, and you begin with them. And that's really a fundamental thing that we go through in the program as we're grad students or whatnot, or even like PhD students. It's a constant reminder. So these people, they know what they're doing. They do have that knowledge. It's not like this is an accident, because it's that's why we have to be licensed, because if we're unethical, they'll take that license off and then you can't practice anymore. So you should be very upset at the people like this, because there really isn't any excuse to have this kind of behavior.
And it took years for me to process that, to get to the point where I am now to even talk to a therapist. Because before I'm just like, well, therapists are bad if they do things like this, and then realizing that there are people that genuinely are in it for the right reasons, and that's why I do foster care, because I've seen people that are not in it for the right reasons. So there have to be a balance in this world, and I think that people that do the right thing are creating the good balance of this world to help those people who are going through it, just like me helping the kids who are in the system and been through so many bad environments.
Right. And that's important, because, and that's what I've always said, that the wounded healers, which is what I call the therapists that really put in the work themselves and have life experiences based in trauma or based in negative experiences, those are probably the best therapists, because they have that experience that you can't fake. You can't fake, unfortunately, you can't fake being a trauma survivor. You are, and then you did the work. You're healing, and I say healing in a present tense because we're always going to be healing for the rest of our lives.
Right.
And so those are the therapists that really connect with people that need help, because it's this kind of like this transparency there, where it's like, okay, this person gets me, even though maybe the words were not the best, but I could sense that this person knows where I'm coming from. So I've always been a proponent that the wounded healers are the best healers, because they're authentic, and there's something you can't go read a book and say, oh, pretend you got, you were in an abusive family for 12
Right.
years. It just happens. And unfortunately, that we could turn that trauma around and use it for good, because every time I meet somebody who was a victim of domestic violence, I lived it, I know what they're going through, and I'm not going to sit there and blame them for being in the wrong family or being in the wrong environment. What I'm going to do is sit there and validate every single feeling that they have, because it to them it does have a lot of weight, and it's very intense. So that's what I do, and that's
Right.
where we're going to start.
Right. I have so much respect for that, and I agree, because that's why I do the foster care that I do with the kids. And a lot of times I'm so open with them and with my experiences, and they're like, "Oh, nobody's ever told me that they've been through something like me." Like, "Oh, you use drugs too?" Yeah, yeah, I did. Like, I've been where you are. I know what most of what you're going through. If not,
Now
I
let
don't understand all of it. I understand some of what you went through.
Yes. Now let me say another thing too. Let's clarify this a little bit, because what we're not doing is we're not being passive in their treatment. Because here's the deal, especially when you're talking to kids, to teenagers. A lot of these teenagers, they develop bad habits, right? Through
Right.
through their trauma, because a lot of, I always like to say, if you're treated like a dog, you're going to live like a dog. That's just the way it is. So a lot of these kids, they're reacting to their anger and their fear and their lack of understanding of why. Well, I need to have you respect me. So I am going to set some boundaries, and those boundaries might seem like I'm being tough on you, but what I'm trying to do is challenge a lot of your negative behaviors, so that you start adapting more positive coping skills to your anger and your frustration, all the things you don't understand. And then in the meantime, we are going to work through that pain together. So I'm not saying here and saying, "Oh, I'm the best. I'm a good guy," because sometimes I'm not gonna come off like a good guy, because I need you to understand that the way you've been living your life has got you in this place, whether it's juvie, whether it's in a
Right.
psychiatric ward, whatever the case may be, where it's court mandated. You're sitting in front of me right now because however you've been living your life hasn't given you what you wanted in a positive way. So let's stop those behaviors now. Because you will have, especially kids, they're very manipulative. You
Oh
will
yeah.
have what you or they'll say something like this: "Oh, you're just contributing to my trauma because you're being mean to me and this and that." And I'll just look at them and say, "Well, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to change your behaviors. And if that's something you don't like, because one of the interventions that I like to do is I'll kick someone out of therapy. I'll go, okay, you'll get discharged, because what that does a lot of, and of course this is depending on the person. I don't do that to everyone, because there's danger. I don't want somebody to go out there and kill somebody or kill themselves. But
Right.
there's certain behaviors where I could see and I could say, you know what, discharge is what this person needs, so they could see that they need to come back, and they'll come back with a better attitude, right?
Right.
Because what happens a lot in inpatient, this is what happens, a common thing in inpatient, and this is not, especially with addicts, with substance abuse addicts, they'll go in there and they'll create scenarios, they'll start drama with other patients, they'll start cursing, they'll start saying, how come this person is violating my rights? All that they're doing is they're avoiding their treatment. They're creating distractions for their treatment, and I see right through that. So I challenge that, and I go, okay, well then, you're telling me that you're not happy here. You're telling me that they're not giving you blankets. You're telling me that you're being abused that night, this and that, like verbally abused by the staff. All I'm seeing is distractions and avoidance. So
And
to clarify,
I'm pretty sure that it works in different scenarios for them, that behavior, but it can't work. It's not going to work there for them, and you show them that.
well, that's how you've been coping. Everything that we do when we're in mental distress, we need coping skills right away. That's one thing about us humans, is that we're very good at adapting to our pain. That's one thing we do. But what happens a lot of the times when people come see me is that their coping skills are maladaptive. So in other words, if I'm gonna go get high because I don't want to process this pain, I'm gonna go numb myself. Yes, it's work for you. You haven't had to process being abused. You haven't had to process being hurt. But look at what you're doing. This costs you everything else. So a lot of these behaviors, people have used them to justify being in misery for a long time, and they haven't felt anything. And so in their mind, they think that's a good thing. Like, I just want to go home and get high, or I want to go home and start, spending all my money on Amazon or whatever the case may be. Well,
Right.
yeah, it's working for you because you don't feel anything. But what about the long run? Where are you going to end up? You're still here. So let's try something different now. And that's like you said, sometimes they think that it's good behaviors, but it's actually bad behaviors.
Exactly. Exactly. You mentioned that you've been through trauma yourself, and you also mentioned that you used before.
Yes.
What are you? Do you share that with them, and is there like a boundary that you create that you let some of it out and you don't, or how do you go about that?
It depends on the rapport, as you could imagine. It depends on where we're at. It depends on the person. Every it's a case by case basis. Usually when I run therapy groups, because I also do a lot of groups, which is actually my favorite thing about what I do. I will disclose because I think in a group setting, you do want that familiarity or that something in common with the other person's pain, right? And so I feel like I get some sort of equity with the people around me if I share some of what I've gone through. Because all of a sudden, not only do I have the clinical authority, but I also now have that like more street level authority too. Like this guy's been through it. Okay, now he's got my attention because in a weird way, I respect the fact that he's been through what I've been through. So now I'm gonna hear him out. So I do disclose some of it, depending. But if let's say I'm dealing with somebody from like Beverly Hills or something who would never even, you know what I'm saying? Then I don't say
Yeah.
anything because I have to be neutral. So it just depends on the person. But with kids, and when I say kids, I don't particularly work with like 12 and under, just because I don't feel comfortable in that setting. Because I have a very the thing about me is that I'm a very deep thinker, and as you could imagine, kids don't give a fuck about deep thinking. They're more about
Not at
they're
all.
they're more about the now. And I've never. That's one of the things about my game that I have to get better at. Like I've never been able to really like go. I guess this is gonna sound horrible, but this is the only way I could describe it. Go kind of down to their level of thinking, and it's like I just feel I've had like I don't feel confident dealing with like 12 and under because it's just there's a certain mentality you gotta have, and there's people in the field that are great at that, and they're older than me, and they're just phenomenal, and that's their gift, and I really admire them for that. But I can't do that. So when I say kids, I'm talking more like 15, 16 and up.
Oh yeah,
Um,
that's
eh,
all I take in is teenage kids, and I mean I can work with younger kids too, but the teenagers, it's just the fact that they have a level of critical thinking, and I can make them think about different things when I talk to them, like and how to process different things. Like you're right, kids, little kids is now. What now? Like
Well, and also they don't have the insights, like you said. Their thinking is very concrete. They don't have a like an abstract level of thinking. So they do a lot of art therapy, right? Because if you tell like a 7-year-old, if you ask them what's going on at home, they don't have the insights to tell you, oh well, I feel sad. They just don't. So what you do is you allow them to draw it out. You give them a piece of paper and say, tell me what your worst nightmare is, right? And a lot of times they'll draw you like a house. It's very creepy because I've seen a pattern of this, and it's weird how that works. They'll draw you like a house, and they'll draw you like a mean man with like horns, and it's like that's probably their dad who's like beating them up you know what I'm saying? And
right,
so
right.
that works. Um, but I don't know. Like to me, like all my interventions require a level of insight, and it's like, what do I do? And I was able to get the kid to tell me what's going on, but how do I do interventions with them? So that's something that I'm still getting training on, and I'm still getting comfortable with. And I will eventually. I'm going to challenge myself because I want to be more well versed in this field to work with little kids because it's also going to affect my pocketbook if I have more options to do more things, right? So
Right, right.
I got to get more comfortable. But as of right now, I really just focus on like 15 and up, because it's just where my comfort zone is. Because like you said, they have more insights. They could relate to more things. They're very good with metaphors, which is important,
Yeah.
and you can move from there.
I have another question for you. Dealing with these all of these people, I know it's difficult sometimes. I know for me, probably why I couldn't get into it is I'm empathetic a lot, and so how do you deal with it without being able to take on their stresses? Because a ton of people, some people come in with a lot of trauma, and their stories have to be heart wrenching. So how do you deal with that?
Well, there's checks and balances that you have to do. Right? Hobbies is very important because I'm a very free spirited person. I don't have any kids, which helps. But at the same time, I know that going into this field, we need to have that ability to disconnect for a while. So I travel a lot. I mean, I like I love wrestling. I love baseball. I'm a musician. So there's a lot of little things that fulfill my spirit whenever I'm out of the office or whatever. So that's something that has helped me a lot. I have a great circle of friends that are very understanding. And also an important thing is that I have what we call supervision. So every therapist should have supervision, which means that you go to your boss, or if you're in a private practice, maybe a fellow therapist, and you talk about some of your struggles throughout the day and some of the things that left you with an impression. And that's very, very, very helpful, because if you're able to do that, then you're able to kind of leave it out at work. You know, it's when you're taking that with you that starts to affect your family, your wife, your kids. But it's important that a therapist or a psychologist or whatnot is a very well-rounded person. In other words, don't allow that to just be your life. There's other aspects of your life that you have to gravitate towards, because you do need an escape from this, you know? So that's important. So just focusing on my goals, focusing on my hobbies, focusing on my friends. Those are the three things that really help me distract myself from the like you said, the emotional uh, stuff that I deal with every day. And it's
Yeah,
really helped a lot.
because one of my friends, she works at a school for the for kids who have struggles like that, and she says like she literally had breakdown sometimes hearing some of their stories of trying to get help. And I'm just like, yeah, you know, that has to be hard. And you know, being a human, if you care about people, you're gonna get invested in that person. So
It is hard. It is very difficult. But I've also told myself that all we're doing is we're providing resources, right? That's all we're doing, because they have to do the work. Like and I tell them, I tell all my clients the same thing. Is like, because a lot of clients, as you could imagine, they come into therapy wanting us to do the majority of the work for them, and that's not gonna work. Okay, so they'll sit there and they'll be upset because they're like, well, I've been coming to like 5 sessions and I haven't seen any improvement. And I'm thinking, well, you haven't put anything into it. How are you going to get something out of something if you haven't put anything into it?
right,
So it's like they have to do the work. I'm providing the resources for them. I'm
right,
providing. So I'm just a vessel. I'm just a guide. That's all I'm doing. I'm getting you to the other side, and then you're going to develop from there. You know, I'll never see. That's one of the things about our job, is like we never see the fully developed person. We just plant the seeds and send them on their way. That is my job. And hopefully they continue, and then some of them don't, because trauma or addiction or whatnot, it's always, I always like to say progress is not linear in this field. That sometimes, you have to go in circles, you got to come right back around, but it's still progress. And that's the thing that a lot of these people don't understand, and they get down on themselves, because like, oh my God, I'm coming back here for the third time. And I remind them, yes, but you're not the same person you were the first time. You're every single time you're coming in to see me or someone else, you're getting more insights about yourself, which is going to help you in the future. And that's really how we should see this. It's kind of a lifelong commitment. But to your question, it's like, yeah, no, I'm just a provider of resources and tools, and it's up to them to take them. And when it's over, then it's over, and so there has been cases where there's been what we call transference or counter transference, where it is difficult for me. And at that point, if it's gonna start detracting from the therapy, then I just refer them out to another therapist. And it has happened, because like you said, we're humans.
right, right. So you mentioned you're a musician. What do you play?
I play the piano and I play a little bit of the guitar, but I'm not, I'm just learning. So, because that's another thing that I didn't mention when I was one of the big helps that I got was I discovered punk music when I was young, when I was like 18 or 19, and that
Oh,
really helped me, because I started going into the punk culture. And the punk culture, it's kind of like the hip hop culture in a lot of ways, in that it's very underground and it's very
yeah,
radicalized. So it's really focused on a lot of the issues that are going on in our society. And once you're in that culture, you start to meet other people that are going to help you introduce you to like certain groups or communities that are going to go to pep rallies, or they're going to go to stand in front of city hall and ask for change. These are the things that I did in my early 20s that really helped me kind of understand some of the more um, social issues that are going on in our community that need change. So that's really what helped me. And so when I discovered that kind of music, obviously I wanted to play, because there was also chicks around. So you know what I'm saying? So, um,
that
and
always helps. It always
that
helps.
always helps. That always helps. You're right. And so the chicks always dig the guitar guy. So I was like, okay, let me try this guitar here. But I started with the guitar, didn't really catch my attention, because I was always kind of like the rebel guy. So I want to be like, you know what, I want to play the drums. So I started playing the drums, and I played that for about 5 years. And then as my musical taste kind of grew, I was like, the piano sounds, because the piano's like very classy. So it's like, and you could play anything on the piano. So I
Right.
was like, let me try that. So I started playing that, and that's really what that's the instrument that I've been focusing on over like the last 10 years or so. So yeah, it's a
Do you
big
read
part of
music?
my life.
Do you read music or do you play by ear?
I started playing by ear, and then I'm barely learning to read like piano music. Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's like
I play.
another language, so it's
Yeah,
hard.
I play piano as well, and I think it's more difficult for us people that play by ear because you hear something and you want to just go get to it. And one of my first piano classes, my teacher ended up kicking me out because he noticed that he would play it and then tell us to read it, and then I would learn it within the first few minutes, and then he'd be like, you know what, you can't sit in here while I play it.
Yeah, I went through the same experience you did too, because what happens is that when you teach yourself to play by ear, and then you're like, well, let me take a class because I want to get better. It's almost like you have to unlearn everything you learn and
Right.
start over again, and that's very frustrating because it's like, well, then I don't want to be here because I feel like I'm like, it's almost like, you feel like the other students have to catch up to you. And
Right.
so anyway, it's like anything, like you're gonna get bored, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, well then I think I could just do better on my own. And then you're gonna kind of, so yeah, so playing by ear and then trying to get trained the real way, it could be very frustrating for sure.
It was hella frustrating for me, but luckily I had a good teacher. I didn't finish, so I probably forgot more than I remember as far as reading music goes. I mean, I remember the notes and everything, but the time signatures and everything, it'd be difficult for me to get back into it. I still know how to do it by ear, but the training, it was frustrating, but it was also a great experience. I had a teacher who really cared and noticed that because a lot of other teachers wouldn't have noticed that I was picking it up like how I was picking it up. But
Yeah,
he
yeah,
looked at
yeah.
me and dead in my eyes and just like, oh, you're not even looking at the music.
Right. And but you know what? At the end of the day, man, I always say music is the most beautiful thing in the world. And really, when you think about it, it is the universal language because music connects all of us. And it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from. Music is has this power, and it's a very therapeutic power. And I'm a huge proponent of it. I mean, one thing that I enjoy a lot is going to concerts because the feel of live music, which is different than a recording, is so intense to me. It's so raw because it's human beings manipulating an object to create magic, and that to me seems so like, I just love being in that environment. So that's something that I really enjoy going to, just going to. And I like to go to those concerts where it's like at a bar or like a small theater. I don't really like arena rock or anything like that, because what if you don't get a good seat, like, you're not really going to get the experience of it. There comes a point where you're so far away that you're just watching it, everything on the screen anyway. So I'm more into that intimate setting of music. And there was a point in my life before COVID where I would make it a priority every other weekend to go out and just go to a random show, even if I've never heard of the artist, and just check them out and just kind of chill there.
That's
Because not
pretty,
only do you get to meet new people, but also you get to experience the live music that I like. So yeah, music is a very big part of my life.
that's pretty dope. What are some of the bands that you're into now?
Well, I mean, I go through phases, and as a musician, you know, I I I try to be open minded to everything. I don't really try to judge any kind of musical format, because I think the message is the same with all music. But so I started, like I said earlier, I started with punk rock, and but then as I started becoming a musician, I kind of became a snob to punk rock, because punk rock is a very simplistic form of music. It's essentially just a G chord over and over. That's really what it is. But the thing is that the message of the lyrics is what's impactful in punk music. And but then I gravitated more towards like the guitar playing. Like I really like Guns N' Roses. That's one of my favorite bands of all time, and I've seen them a bunch of times because Slash kind of became like my hero when it came to playing the guitar.
Classic.
um yeah, I really like the Doors a lot. The Doors I could listen to all day. All their songs are classic to me. um I really like Metallica a lot. So a lot of the more bigger bands is the ones that I've been listening to lately. But
I
there's
listen
also
to
like a lot of like what we call garage rock, where it's like local bands as well. And that we have here in LA that I'm really getting into as well. So it just varies. It just varies,
yeah.
depending on the year of the day.
As much as I love hip hop, I love rock too. And a lot of people were, especially in the black community, people were like, "You like that?" It's just like I remember when I was probably like 16 or so. Korn's album that came out, Freak on a Leash, and my aunt came over and she was a Jehovah's Witness and she cursed me out because I was watching I think it was the second single off of that album. I can't remember what it was called.
Yeah.
But she looked at the video and was just like, "That's the devil. You gotta turn that shit off."
Yeah, yeah. And we should talk about, I think one of the questions that from the page talks about how stressful it is to be embedded in a culture, because the culture does influence us and it does make us feel guilty. Like if you were embedded heavily into that culture, you would have felt horrible, and maybe you would have felt like she was right, and it's like, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't do it, and that leads to anxiety because your spirit wants to do it, but
Right.
everybody around you is telling you not to do it, and that could lead to like depression and anxiety for a lot of people.
Definitely not being able to fit it. We're gonna dive into some of those questions in a little while, but let's turn a little bit and talk about I did want to talk about how did you meet Danny, since he was on here and this is how I met you. How did you guys meet? Because you guys are on two different sides of the country. So
yeah, I'll answer that. Let me go get a drink. It's like 2 steps from here. I'll be right back.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, I'm back. All right. So back before this AEW, which is a wrestling company, there was a the community was a little more knowledgeable to the wrestling business, and a lot of the people that were really smart to the business, they gravitated towards this board that you had to pay for. You still have to pay for this board called the F4W Online Board, which was very popular. It's still popular, but it was very popular at the time because at that time it's really all we had. We had that, and we had another board called the Wrestling Classics Board, where everybody would go there and post and really just have intelligent conversations about wrestling, about booking, about characters that were over, that were not over, etc. AEW came in and really changed a lot of that, because what they did is they brought up a bunch of new fans who have no knowledge, but they're talking as if they do, and they just creates these very bottom of the barrel conversations. But anyways, so Danny was on there, and then I was on there. And at that time, this was about 12 years ago, I had started my undergrad studies in psychology, and Danny started doing shows because Danny has been podcasting since before it was cool. He was podcasting since like 07 or something like that. We talk a lot about it on our podcast about the good old days. This guy Danny, he's very, when it comes to podcasting, I tell him I'm a mark for him, because I became a fan of his through his podcasting of those early days. He used to do this thing on, it was Blog Talk Radio. That's very old shit right there.
Oh, I remember that.
yes. And he used to have this show on there on Wednesdays. It was a live show. In other words, it wasn't a pod. It was just, it's like being on the radio.
Right.
And he used to come out with the most outrageous topics that would not get over today, because they were very non-PC.
Was it just him, or was it
no, he had an entire crew. He was like the old Howard Stern crew. He had like I think he called them the Vogue crew or something, where it was a bunch of people that would come in.
Oh, he got to bring those out of the vault. I want to hear some.
Yeah, they're awesome. They're awesome stuff. And he did a couple shows that really upset me, because that's at the time where I was getting really embedded in the world of psychology and mental health. And he had one where that said something about turn your hoe into a housewife. And I'm like, wait a minute. But that was one. And then there was another one where he was giving like love advice. And I'm thinking that's not the best advice. So I reached out to him. And that's really that's really what started. We started communicating back and forth on DMs, and we found out that we had a passion for wrestling, both of us. And so what started to happen is that, because we started kind of dating, me and him were dating girls at the time, and we would go to each other for advice on the relationships. So that made it more personal. So now it's more of a like, that's when I really started considering him a friend, because it's like
a real friendship. That's what's up.
Yeah. So then when he would have girl trouble, he would call me, and we would be on the phone for hours. And then when I had girl trouble, I would call him, and we would be on the phone for hours. And that turned into wrestling talk, because again, a lot of these conversations when it came to our significant others were like bad news, right? We got into an argument with them, or even when we broke up officially. So we were there for each other to kind of pick each other up. and we gravitated to the thing that we've been doing since we were little kids, and that's using wrestling as our coping skill to deal with our pain from these relationships. So then we just started talking for hours about wrestling, and that was the bond right there. And then, you know, it got more deeper. You know, I talked a lot about a lot of his other family members that I'm not going to get into because it's personal, but
Of course, of course.
it just became more of a friendship than somebody you know online.
So where did
And
the idea come from to launch the KLB podcast?
so that's where it came from, because we were talking so much on the phone for like 4 or 5 hours at the time of nothing but wrestling, that one day he told me, he was like, well, let's just press record and see where it takes us. What happened was that he had this project called 30 for 30, which was, he was going to do a very in-depth view of all the, at that time, the previous 30 WrestleManias, because at that time we're like at WrestleMania 29, and then that year it was supposed to be, we were going to end it with 30, which was going to be coming up relatively soon.
Right.
And at the time, because I was very cynical, actually I still am, about social media, and when I don't have a big presence on social media because I have my opinions on it, I think it's been very destructive in the grand scheme of things to our society.
I agree.
So he started it with a couple other guys, and then I got mad at him because he knows one thing about me that I pride myself, but at the same time I'm a little embarrassed about, is that I have this immense knowledge about professional wrestling. But then again, I'm thinking, what the fuck does it matter? When would I ever be able to monetize? Who gives a shit? It's just like a worthless you know, skill or knowledge or whatever. So he started the first few episodes of 30 for 30, I think up to WrestleMania 14 with a couple other guys, and then one of them flaked out on him, and he told me to jump in, and he's like, I didn't want to ask you because I know how you feel about all this stuff, and you know, I didn't want, and I'm thinking, why don't you just ask me from the first one? And he's thinking I didn't want to ask you because you were going to tell me no, and see, that's bad to assume. That was a good lesson for both of us. And so what happened is that I jumped on after WrestleMania 14, and I finished the entire series with him. And then from there,
was he aware at the time of your level of knowledge about the business?
oh yeah. Because at that time I had known them. So I met him in 2009. At this point, we're talking like 2013. So yeah, we had known each other. I had actually already met him at WrestleMania in Miami. That's the first time I ever met him.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, we were both in Miami, and we met for the first time, and you know, we've always had that chemistry. And so after we finished 30 for 30, he was like, why don't we start like a show, like just because we're always talking about wrestling, and we would always pop ourselves, we would always make each other laugh about how the stupidity of wrestling, and yet how impactful it's been in our lives. So I go, okay, fuck it. Let's give it a trial run. And this is 2014. And then we were thinking about a name for the show. And we went through a bunch of them, you know, over the time. And then we were laughing at the fabulous Rougeau brothers. I remember that. Because they have Raymond Rougeau, which is one of the guys that me and him really pop for. And I go, why don't we call it the K Fabulous Lucha Brothers? Because we're both Latinos.
Right.
And so it's Lucha. Yeah, it's lucha. So and then K Fabulous is kayfabe. Kayfabe is the term that the old carnies would use not to reveal the secrets of the business. So that's so whenever they would ask an old wrestler, could you tell me if it's real or fake? They would kayfabe. That means they would lie about, you know, whether the business was real or fake. And so that's how the name came about. And we our first show was the Royal Rumble '92, which is one of my favorite shows of all time. I think I've watched it like 100 times, legit. And then we were off and running, and we've been doing it ever since. And so that's going to be going on 8 years, but we've taken breaks along the way. You know, like any friendship, me and him have had misunderstandings, because we became, like, I consider him a real friend, a real close friend. And like any friendship, you know, we've had disagreements over the years, because one thing about Big D is that he's a sweetheart and I love him to death, but he could also be very hard to deal with sometimes. So I've needed my breaks from him over the years. But we've always come back, and we've always kind of done more and more. And so that's where we're at. And so we've been doing this for about 8 years now.
Tell me about your journey with wrestling. So you said you knew a lot. When did you know that it was like you loved it so much? And then when did you know that? Because Danny told me that he knew early on that it wasn't, you know, it wasn't real. When did you know?
Well, my dad love lucha libre, right, from Mexico.
Uh-huh.
So I was already introduced to that form of wrestling before I discovered. Actually, I discovered the NWA first. I discovered, so which, WCW was the last member of the NWA. So really, people think NWA, WCW, which is fine, even though they're two completely different companies. Um, so I was a WCW fan first. This would have been 86, 87. Because I was born in 80, so I was about 6 or 7 years old. And then I had some neighbors coming in that introduced me to WWF, which was around 87 as well. I always knew it was fake because they came from the same place. Like they came from the same entranceway. So my mind, I was like, why don't they just start fighting while they're waiting to come out? I remember thinking that, like if they're back there waiting to come out, what keeps them from fighting? How come we always have to wait for them to come out and then they start fighting? It just didn't make any sense to me.
That's that street mentality. Get down where you mad at. You really gonna fight? I'm gonna fight
Yeah,
right here,
yeah,
right
it's
now.
like, right. And then of course, like, I had seen real fights. So I mean, I know that if you get punched in the face one time, you're probably going down, or at least it hurts. So I knew that it was show from the very, very young age as well. But when my life was so chaotic, as I told before, as a kid, that was such a distraction for me. There's two things that were a distraction for me: wrestling and like movies. Those are the two things that I gravitated towards. Like I could watch movies. To this day, I'm a huge cinephile, and I'll watch a lot of stuff. And wrestling was one of it, and it was really I think wrestling saved my life in a lot of ways, because instead of being out there in the streets getting in trouble, I had to be home in time for the pay-per-view, which, by the way, I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, I had to watch it in Scramble Vision because I didn't have any.
Bro, I watched so many. The fucking the one I remember most was the fucking the tag match with Mick Foley and Triple H. Bro, I swore I saw something through it. I just was watching it and just hearing JR commentate through the shit.
That's all you could do. You would sit there, you would turn on your TV, and you would just see the scramble feed, and you just hear the commentary. And like you said, once in a while, the feed would be to where it adjusts, so where you could make out the ring and the wrestlers, and you were like, "Yeah, stay like that." And then it's like, nope, it was like,
nope.
Yeah, that and porn, but porn wasn't as fun to watch like that. So I would just watch I would just watch the wrestling like that. So I don't know, it became part of who I am, and I really gravitated towards it. And then around 95, 96, so I still would have been about 14, 15 years old. I was reading a PWI magazine, and behind it, there was a coupon for the Wrestling Observer newsletter. So I'm like, okay, let me try this. And I send out my money. It was like $11 for like 4 issues. And that was my introduction to becoming a smart mark at that point. So that's when I really started to know the ins and outs of why things happen in wrestling, the behind the scenes stuff. And so that was really where that started. And ever since then, I never turned back. I mean, once I became an Observer subscriber, I kind of stayed to this day. So that's really where it started from.
Yeah, I can't even remember how I found out it was fake. Probably like late 90s, I knew. And then people were telling me, why do you still watch it? I'm just like, because it's interesting. It's the storylines. And then now, when I'm older now, seeing people try to act like they're knowledgeable about the business and don't know shit, it kind of pisses me.
Yeah. But it was an interesting time, because I think about like I'll give you an example, because nowadays teenagers have everything brought to them, from music to movies to sports. Everything's in a phone, everything's in a laptop. We had to dig this stuff out. Like when I became because of the fact that I could only see pay-per-views on Scramble Vision, I had to wait for them to be released in Coliseum Video, which was about a 3-month wait in order for me to actually see the show. So I would do that. But because we didn't have a car, what I would like to do is I would get all these memberships from different video stores all over LA, and then I would go I would get on the bus. Now we're talking about a 13, 14-year-old kid. I would leave my house, get on the bus, and just go to all these little spots all over the city and rent movies, and then bring them home and watch them. And then sometimes I would walk like maybe 2-3 miles to the next video store and rent more movies. And I did that for years. And I'm thinking, there's no kid that would ever even imagine doing that now, because you don't have to.
Right.
And not only that, like I'm thinking if I had a 13-year-old, I would never allow them to do that. That's dangerous. And here I was doing like getting on the bus by myself, getting off, and we had no GP. I don't know. I don't even remember how the fuck I found my way back home half the time. But those were good times, man. And what I like about my generation specifically, and I've always brought this up to people from that are within my age range, is that living in the analog generation really forced you to become a survivor because you had to mobilize yourself in order to
Exactly.
get the hottest thing going out there. Even like I know you're like a big hip hop fan. Even like if you want to listen to the latest hip hop songs of that time, you couldn't just go to Tower Records and buy the album. You had to go look for it, you know?
Exactly.
And that meant you had to go to a show so you could see the dudes in the back of their car handing out their bootlegs, or you had to, like, if you were embedded in a scene, you had to participate in that scene in order to stay relevant. You couldn't just stay on your computer and wait for everything to be uploaded and just listen to it, because there was no way to do that back then. You had
Not
to
at
actually
all.
go out there and support, which is something that's completely missing from today's generation.
100%. I 100% agree with that.
And
So
on top of that, you would get kind of like development on how to be social, right? Because you were forced to go out there and be with people. You weren't like isolated
right,
in your little
you had to engage with that. Like I was gonna ask you your opinion on the whole metaverse thing. You know, people are trying to make us separate, even more separate than we have ever been, and I think it's detrimental to us as a
It's
society.
detrimental. I worry a lot. I worry about the general. I have nieces. I have teenage nieces, and I talk to them all the time. I say, you know, I'm concerned about people's self-esteem, like the generation now, because it's gonna be in the toilet, because so much of our expectations now are coming from social media, which is completely fake. And
Right,
having flashcards of a person's happiness and comparing it to your own life, where you get the entire perspective, that's completely unfair to you. That's completely unfair to anybody that's, you know, you go on social media and everybody's just giving you their what they want to share, which tends to be positive. And
right,
then you're seeing that over and over, different people all day, and then you come home to your life, which is probably pretty good, but when you compare it to all those little highlights, that's all you're getting, all of a sudden it's like, my life ain't so great. So already you're kind of like, you're kind of down on yourself. And
right.
again, you're handicapping yourself, because that is not a fair comparison. Um, even but also, that's one concern. I think this idea that everybody has an opinion also hurts, because what used to happen back in the day is that whatever mental capacity you had, whatever cognitive abilities you had, you tended to gravitate towards those people in the real world. Even though the world was smaller because it was limited to your community, you still engage in conversations that were adequate for your level of thought, right? And that was
Right,
good.
right,
And in time you would go higher and higher. On the internet, because there's no filter, you're having all kinds of discussions with all kinds of different levels of people. And if you're like an abstract thinker, you're going to get very frustrated, because a lot of those people are not at the level you're at. And so
right.
it creates this imbalance. And so now we're responding to like low level conversations, and it creates this cycle of like, we're empowering those more concrete level of thinking when we shouldn't, because they in the real world, we would never do that. If somebody has an opinion that's not valid, we just wouldn't listen to it. Now here
Exactly.
on the internet, because everybody has an opinion regardless of your level of thinking, we're responding to all levels, and we're empowering those levels of thinking in the process, because the more you respond to it, the more you're feeding into it, and the more it trends, and the more people are going to be exposed to it. So now somebody that has a very ignorant comment is gonna feel more powerful, and they're just gonna continue to do it because it validates how they feel, as a person, typing from their keyboard. So there's a lot of dangers in that sense. And then on top of that, how we see ourselves, because a lot of people, especially younger people, they put a lot of stock on the likes, right? It's like all of a sudden they start thinking, how come they don't like this picture? Is it something and it starts affecting with your
Exactly.
self-esteem, when in reality, most people, when they're scrolling, they're just kind of charity liking, like they'll just like anything. So there shouldn't be a lot of volume or weight placed on likes, because a lot of people are just doing it just because that's what they do. They're not looking into your message. I mean, some are, but most people, they're not really, they don't really have an opinion on your picture one way or the other. It's literally just this habit of scrolling, liking, and that's it.
Yeah, I have a lot of nieces and nephews as well, and I see them trying to navigate that life, and I'm just like, damn, like I wish sometimes that you could just get outside and experience life the real way like we did. Like
Right.
jump head first out there, go get lost on the bus somewhere, have to figure it out together, how to get your way back with your friends, like build
Right.
a real bond with somebody. I'm not saying that you can't build a real bond on the internet, but it's different when you meet somebody in person, and having to navigate life that way is better to me.
Well, no, there is a difference. There is a scientific reason when it comes to friendships and relationships. There are different variables that need to be met in order to establish a legitimate relationship, and that's another thing that bothers me about social media, because we think we have these friendships, but they're not really friendships. There's just these ways to communicate with another person that are completely safe. You know what I'm saying? And they're very low risk conversations, and they're conversations that always have your best foot forward. In other words, you're never gonna see a person that you know online 100% have a bad day, and thus you can build a map in your mind of how that person is when they're in a bad mood, legitimate bad mood. So there's a lot of dynamics that are not met online that affect developing a real friendship, which means seeing the entire well-rounded person, all the layers of their personality, so that you yourself could start building a pathway into meeting the demands of that person. And you can't meet the demands of that person until you see how they really are.
Exactly.
And that really
to
affects
fabricate, life for somebody on the internet and think you'll never know. And then somebody, like I've seen people say, oh, well, after somebody commits suicide, well, he seemed happy to me. And it's just like, but you didn't know who he was.
That's right. And you'll see, and that's very common. I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of times it's like, well, he was happy and this and that. And the thing is, well, had you met them in the real world, you would have been able to read the nonverbal cues, because nonverbal cues are also very important in developing friendships, because we're very expressive with our bodies and our face. And when you care for someone in the real world, that's a huge component of the relationship, and you can't see that online. So essentially what we're doing is we're building relationships on pretty much like avatars, or we're building relationships on this perception of what a person really is, but that's not really who they are. And again, that's very dangerous. So we've gone through all these things that concern me about the future of our communities and our culture here in the United States. And I do get very concerned about that.
I would love to have you on again to dive more into that, bro. Like that is something I could probably talk about for much longer. I feel like we're going there, and I don't know what we can do to prevent it other than spread the word to the younger generation about about this. But I feel like no matter what, we're going to end up in a society where people are going to end up living in their entire lives through screens. And
Yeah, well, we're pretty much there now, and it's like I told you earlier. Like one of the biggest concepts of my life is, what could I control and what can I not control? And I can't control where the internet goes. That's too much for me. So what I could control is the world that I build around myself to avoid that, and that's all. And that's what I'm gonna do as a human being, is just kind of just give myself some checks and balances, because I'm still a human being and I still want to be a part of a community. So it's very, very easy, even with the knowledge that me and you have, to get sucked into that world. Before we know it, we're in there as well, and we're like, wait a minute, whoa, whoa, whoa. So just having the awareness, and just having those like I said earlier, those checks and balances that say, okay, this is over the line, take a break. And that's what I could do from my end, and that's what I'm gonna do. So I'm just gonna.
I've had to do that a lot, because I've actually had a friend, and it's crazy. We knew each other in real life, and because we're so passionate, like I'm very passionate about politics, because I want to make a real change, systemic change. And he made a group on Facebook, and I'm noticing myself debating with people that are clearly not knowledgeable about anything. And then I get sucked into the bullshit with them, and next thing you know, it comes out to a name calling fest, and I'm just like, this is not me. Like,
Yeah. No, we get caught up in it, and next thing you know, it's like, that's what I'm saying. We have to really kind of check ourselves for that.
And we're going to stop right there, guys. Thank you for tuning in for this week's episode of Royalty Reel's Real Podcast. If you want to hear part 2 of my discussion with Brandon Draven, a.k.a. Pedro Nunez, come back next week. Very interesting. We had to break it up into 2 parts. Next week, we'll be talking a little bit more about wrestling and a lot more about psychology and mental health. Thank you, guys. See you next week. Peace.
Yeah. Oh no, let's get drunk and fuck for sure. Please stop.